Welcome to Labs Weekly. We're here to talk about some interesting security things over the past week. Hopefully we can keep your attention for a few minutes. But I think the first thing that's kind of front and center on most folks' mind right now is security and privacy with regard to people working from home. And there's been some companies a la Zoom kind of thrown into the limelight and forefront of the security and privacy world. And it feels like they're getting hit quite a bit with potential security issues, privacy issues, things like that. And we just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff we've seen and some of the possible FUD that's also being propagated. And we'll go from there. So I'm going to hand it off to Dan Amadeo a little bit here to talk about some of the stuff he's seen. He pulled the Mac installer apart and looked at a few of the different tools they had in there. So.
Yeah, I feel bad for them, honestly, because they're getting a lot of attention right now, which is, some of it's deserved, some of it's probably, I don't know, maybe blown out of proportion a little bit, which is part of the reason why I I deleted and reposted the one tweet that I had, because it's like, I feel like the context got lost a little bit in the thread, and I don't want people to think that some of these issues are, worse than they actually are. So. But probably bigger than the Zoom installer issue is the UNC path issue that's being shared around right now. So maybe we talk about that one first. Basically, the researcher is saying you could put a UNC path, so like a file share path, into chat and turn that into a link. And somebody could click that link and go out, and the way Windows machines works is if you visit a UNC path, it will try to authenticate to it by default with SMB. You can try to crack those password hashes offline. You can relay those to other servers if you have sufficient network access and stuff like that. I'm a little conflicted on it. Like, on the one hand, I think maybe those probably shouldn't be resolved into like links you can click by default, because it makes it too easy for people to click them. But at the same point in time, that's been used in like phishing campaigns for a while inside Word documents, for example, for people to click on those paths. And most corps block SMB egress by default to address that. So I don't know if you all have any thoughts on it. I'm on the fence, because I think it's an interesting finding, and a lot of this stuff is kind of like, a bunch of little things that add up that are showing that, maybe they didn't tighten stuff down as much as they should have. I think looking at the history of vulnerabilities shows that too. Like, they've had unauthenticated web servers on Mac OS that like just let anybody control your webcam and all type of stuff. It's like they're trying to get better. I think they're definitely getting a lot more eyes and scrutiny right now, and that's part of why everything is falling out. But I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about the link UNC path deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think initially it was this is something that was God, it was from 15 plus years ago, right? Like, where I think it was At Stake or someone had found it in some desktop tools where you could pass in UNC paths and people could click on them, and the NTLM token can then be intercepted and brute forced, if you will. To me, I think that's the biggest issue. The issue of, I can reference the calculator on your machine, and then you have to click the link, and then you have to approve running it. I mean, it pretty much tells you right in your face that you need to run this thing that you just clicked on. So I think it's a little overblown for that specific vector, but the whole, Windows machine thing, I think is probably an issue that they should look at fixing, if you will. But there's been a lot of other FUD. There was some privacy issues potentially with some of the recording of private chats, where people had said that when you do a cloud recording or a local recording, that all chats were recorded, including private chats, and then they were sent to the host when the recording was done. We did some pretty extensive testing and just never saw it. We tried it from different mobile apps, mobile Zoom apps and whatever else. Turns out that the private chats that these people were seeing were private chats to the host, so the host already had access to them anyway. So again, it was just a little bit of extra quick FUD that people took the wrong way, and it's still propagating. Like about every week, someone says, "Hey, you can look at private chats." I just don't see that as being true. So we're going to continue to see more of this. I mean, Zoom is definitely probably the choice of most organizations right now because of the power and ease of use. And also, educational institutions, they're able to use it for free now, and for longer than the allotted normal 40 minutes on the free plan. So we'll continue to see it. It'd be cool, Dan, if you showed the weirdness in the authenticator thing that they have.
Yeah, I'm not super down with feeding into the FUD and jumping on the Zoom bashing train, which is, like you said, is why I kind of deleted and reposted my tweet, because I think people were taking it the wrong way. So basically, this guy, Felix on Twitter, did a great teardown of it. It's his handle's C1TRUZ_. Basically, their installer, the way that package installers on Mac are supposed to work is you have a set of pre-install scripts that you're allowed to run before the install process completes, and that allows you typically to check and see if the version is supported, anything that the installer needs to do to like look at the platform and be like, okay, it's all right to continue. And what Zoom decided to do is just bundle their entire installer right in the pre-install script, so you don't have to click through as much. So they have like, he did a great teardown, but they have like a 7-zip archive that's packed into the pre-install scripts, and they bundled like a version of 7-zip, and they wrote their own equivalent of sudo, essentially, which is this like Zoom authenticator tool. So if you don't already have admin privileges, or if it's not already running with enough privileges to just dump the binary into your applications folder, it will use their authentication tool to pop up a login and say, hey, system needs you to authenticate, and then run the rest of their installer script all in the pre-install phase of the package installer. So there's a couple reasons why that's like weird and not super okay. And it's mostly because they're not following what the guidance from Apple is on how to use package install bundles, and actually actually use the built-in elevation stuff there, actually install the stuff as part of the, like, in the correct process, at the correct like time frame in the process there. And it's what like a lot of malware will do the same thing, right? So like impersonate system with like a login prompt. It kind of just hides the true nature of what the installer is doing, and uses the same patterns that malware does. I think he said in his thread, and I said the same thing, is it's like, I don't think it's really like directly exploitable. I don't think there's a direct vulnerability there, but it's kind of a combination of some really odd and questionable choices on like how they hacked together this installer. And it's kind of a sketchy way to do it. Because like if you inspect the installer, it'll say like, hey, this package doesn't install any files. And you're like, well, that's weird. And it's because they just do it all in this pre-install script. And they use this same like system impersonation login prompt deal that that malware and like pen testing post-exploit scripts use. I'm pretty sure there was an Empire module that did the same thing, like for elevating an OS X, just like pops a prompt as system and says, hey, system needs to authenticate. And you're like, oh, that's weird, I must have an update, right? So it's just super strange. It's not an exploit. It's not a vulnerability. I don't think anybody could like weaponize it, but it it's weird, and and they probably shouldn't do it the way they chose to do it because it looks bad.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to continue to see a lot of this stuff. Unfortunate for Zoom, but the eyes are definitely on them. And hopefully it allows them to make some better changes. A lot of the stuff that people are talking about, I think, are settings as well. Some of them are default. Like there was the privacy issue of the focused tracking where it tracks to make sure that Zoom is in focus. That's off by default. People can turn it on. And it's one of those things. I'm not sure if that's something we can set at the org level or not, but we'll definitely probably look into it. So, but I think we've beat this one enough. But it's definitely something that keeps coming back, if you will. And I'm sure we'll see more of it in the next few days, especially now that some of the prominent researchers have been, starting to dig into things.
That's kind of along the lines of the like desktop monitoring software that Sarah was talking about, right? So Sarah, I don't know if you want to share that, but like the Big Brother, are you paying attention type stuff is always super sketchy.
So the issue was that every 5 minutes a photo would be taken to see if, basically if you're paying attention. But also one huge concern was that someone could video call you. You have no real option to answer. It automatically goes, calls you, and that's absolutely terrifying. It's absolute micromanaging at best. Like, it's
I mean,
I don't know how it has that function to automatically. It's scary it has that function to go automatically and answer that for you.
It's it kind of reminds me back in the day when there were some vulnerabilities in Skype, and you could like iframe a call to Skype and it would automatically answer it. But there are organizations that have been like forced into this whole work from home thing, and they're not used to it, or they are definitely dead set against it. So unfortunately, they are being Big Brother-ish. I think this tool that you had meant, it was like Sneek, SNEEK, meant to basically make sure that people are working and at their desks and doing whatever they should be doing, which is unfortunate. I think the world is changing. I think the work from home thing is only going to expand now when companies realize they can do it and survive, and people, have probably a better work-life balance doing it. But the needless tracking tools, please stop.
Yeah, it reminded me of like the third party like outsourcing software platforms have had stuff like that for a while, like Odesk and Upwork and whatever, where they just screenshot your desktop every couple seconds to make sure you're working, so whoever hired you can scroll back and review it. And people have been complaining about that for a while. And I don't know if I haven't done the research if they still have that or if they took it out or whatever, or everybody eventually just forgot about it. But it is super weird to have somebody sitting over your shoulder watching you work.
I saw a tweet that said, what led the technology revolution at your company, the CEO, the CTO, or COVID-19? And most people, were selecting the COVID-19. I thought that was pretty funny. Just the idea that more companies are now working from home than ever. And people who, like David said, people who thought that it was not a possibility in the past are now finding out that, hey, this is actually, not only is it possible, but we're pretty productive. My wife's company sent out an email saying that they set a record for the number of loans they processed in that week. And my wife said, of course, because everyone is at home and happier, we're not all standing around cubicles or whatever. So
it's going to go hard two ways. Like, oh, this work from home thing is great. Or like, we cannot accomplish anything. Or like, I hate it. I hate being home all the time. I was watching like some of the people that, some of the like content producers that do like, stuff like this, like streaming and whatever, where they're used to being in the same room in order to get the, to create the content that they create. It's just impossible for them to do the same thing remotely and have the same feel for. And that's different than like what all the, you know, tech companies are dealing with, you know, in terms of like, you know, being able to process loans or like whatever we're doing, like doing research or reading code and whatever. I don't think it applies to everybody. It probably applies to most people, but it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Like, are more companies going to be positive work from home, or are we just going to go back to like, well, that was a fun experiment, let's go back to normal, you know?
Yeah. I hope it's the former. I hope, you know, more and more people can balance things better, you know, and, you know, but adding things like Sneek or whatever else to the tool set to track employees is not going to help them feel like they're being trusted either. So there's definitely a balance. I mean, I've been working home for the better part of 15 plus years, you know, and traveling, whatever else. So it's fairly normal for me to do this. But to some others, it's like they, for 20 years, have been going into an office and sitting in a cubicle next to a bunch of people. So there'll be a period of adjustment, but I think, you know, once they figure it out, they'll realize that, you know, they can still get their work done. So
Yeah.
anyway,
and what those companies don't realize is for every company that wants to big brother peer over your shoulder, there's like 50 companies that won't. And they're just going to increase turnover. They're going to decrease productivity. And like those people will leave.
Yeah. Yep.
It's going to be
Great.
easier to be like fluid and mobile in the job market the more companies support remote work.
Yep.
And we're probably a little spoiled, you know, with that in security industry and for like senior developers, even in tech, just because the demand is so high, that like if you are worth your salt, then pretty much any company will consider having you remote. And there's a select few, there's a very much shorter list of tech companies that won't entertain senior people being remote, just because of how high the demand is. So I would like to see it be easier for, you know, for other job categories to be able to be done remotely, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Awesome. So let's move on. One other thing I wanted to talk about, you know, one of the things that, you know, we struggle with, and I'm sure a lot of organizations struggle with, is browser extensions and knowing, you know, how deep you need to go to make sure that it's something that isn't going to, you know, cause harm or add risk to the organization, without doing full-on analysis of each one every single time someone wants to use it. So we stumbled across this really neat tool. I was going to show you here. It's called ExtAnalysis. So it actually does a few things for you. It definitely looks at your different extensions from Chrome, Firefox, Brave. I don't think it does anything from Safari, but it's pretty neat. It's just a Python script, really easy to download and install. The directions were great, and it loads a browser app on your machine, and you basically just paste in the link to the Chrome or a Brave or Firefox extension that you want to analyze. Click download and analyze, and it will analyze it for you. So I did one with Okta because Okta is something we use internally, and this is kind of what the results look like. It's got a lot of information. I'm still trying to parse through and figure out like what's important to us. You know, it scans it, tells you what it is, the version, all that good stuff. Brings in the manifest that's important to see some of the permissions and things like that. But it does break things down even further for you. It has this really neat flow map, which is kind of hard to read in some cases like this, where it's obviously using a bunch of resources and whatever else from all over the place, but it's interactive. It's kind of neat. But you can see here that it does list, you know, all of the different files. And the neat thing about this is you can look at the source if you really wanted to. And if there are cases where, you know, something is found as a vulnerability within that piece of code, you can see what it is. You know, jQuery definitely has some issues with some of the older versions of it too. So that's kind of neat. One thing that I'm interested in is the permissions, the permissions that the plugin requests when you install it. So these are really interesting to me, to be able to see, like, by default, what can these plugins do once they've been installed. And you can look through and see that, oh, the cookies, it gives the extension full access to your cookies, and then you have to kind of step back and think about, well, why would it need that, right? Well, Okta integrates with a lot of different systems, so it would kind of make sense that they'd need access to some of those, and so on and so forth. But it breaks all that down for you. Another interesting part is it talks about all of the different URLs or domains that the plugin reaches out to. So this is kind of neat. You can come in here and see if anything might look a little sketchy, or why they're utilizing something, and then you can trace it back to maybe some of the third-party code that they're using to help you analyze it. But it's a really neat tool, really easy to use. I think we'll start using it more and more here for sure. And there are other options. There are some online options where you can upload or have it do the analysis online too, if you don't want to pull down code. But this one seems to be the most powerful as far as what it provides from a data perspective. So I thought it was neat.
Yeah, that's really cool. One of the things I really like to look at with browser extensions, especially, is if they are modifying any content in the DOM, and looking at the code for how they do that, and what JavaScript scopes they're using. Like, are they properly restricting the objects that are being put into the scope of the page? So, like, and I have looked at a fair amount of that with the Okta extension, for example. Are they introducing objects that could be manipulated by a malicious website, or something like that, right? Because I wouldn't want a scenario where I visit evil.com, and because I have the Okta extension installed, it can now call stuff within that extension because it exposed objects to the page. Because something that Okta and LastPass and like all of these all the ad blocker plugins, they, by nature of the way they work, they need to have access to the page that you're on, and they need to modify login forms in order to put your saved credentials in, or modify ad scripts on the page to remove them or make them not visible, just because that's the features that they provide.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I just thought it was kind of neat to use this just to do a real quick analysis of something without having to actually even open the code and look at it directly. It helps kind of get over that first few hours of analysis that we just don't have to do anymore. So it's kind of neat. Awesome. So the last real thing I wanted to chat about quick is turn it over to Adam. So Adam Shaw is one of the founders and co-organizers of the KernelCon conference, which is a pretty awesome security conference put on in Omaha, Nebraska. Unfortunately, they were part of the COVID-19 issues, so they decided to go all virtual. And I thought it was awesome. I spoke at it. It was so the training was on Wednesday and Thursday, and the conference itself was Friday, Saturday. But I wanted his thoughts, kind of a recap on the conference and, any lessons learned or whatever from then, basically in 2 weeks, going from all on site to all virtual conference.
Thanks, David. Yeah, like David said, KernelCon is a Midwest security conference located in Omaha, Nebraska. Usually we attract between 300 and 500 people. This is the second year running KernelCon, and we were trending towards well over 400 people in person attendance. Unfortunately, basically the first case of COVID hit United States around about a month leading up to the first case of community spread. COVID, was about a month away from KernelCon. And at the time, we had thought, well, that's on the coast. We're looking okay. We're doing pretty well. But what resulted from the first case of community spread was just an insane ramp up of COVID cases across the entire United States. So about 2 weeks left, exactly 14 days away from our conference, we had a organizer meeting, and we had to make the decision to take the entire conference virtual, which was just an insane undertaking in 14 days. So in addition to canceling our plans with hotels and vendors, etc., we had to try to work with our trainers, our workshops, and our villages to move them to virtualization, like virtualized training sessions and virtualized workshops and villages. So that was a huge undertaking, and I'm lucky enough to have to work with a team of 13 good committed individuals in our organizing committee. And we were able to basically move from an in-person conference to completely virtualized using Zoom and Vimeo for the streaming capacity, using the open broadcast software, which is popular in Twitch and other streaming, kind of as an interface between Zoom and Vimeo. So each speaker got their own Zoom room, and we would set them up. David, you can speak to this, but we would set them up, a good 15 minutes ahead of their speech, and they have their own private Zoom room. And the Zoom room would then be translated over to Vimeo, a Vimeo live stream, which is what our attendees were watching. There's some other virtual conferences that used GoToWebinar and didn't have as much success as we had with the Zoom to Vimeo live stream capabilities. So for all of the other organizers who end up listening to this podcast, that's something that I would definitely recommend if you're looking to reach out to KernelCon or people who have experience moving a con virtual. We actually worked with Black Hills Information Security because in the weeks leading up to KernelCon, they had moved their Wild West Hacking Fest San Diego completely virtual. And in speaking with them, we were able to determine a few things. One, we didn't want to use GoToWebinar. That was something that they had trouble with. We decided what kind of streaming capabilities we wanted. We also learned some lessons, like do camera tests with all your speakers ahead of time, and microphone checks, right? It's kind of counterintuitive, but when you're doing this virtual conference, the most important thing is not exactly the camera and the stream necessarily. More important is the microphone, because the content needs to get to your attendees. So we ended up putting just a ton of hours in. I was pretty wiped when this was all said and done, but we ran 2 tracks for 2 days. We had 420 attendees, which was just awesome. And we're thinking about maybe potentially adding a virtual component to our future conferences, because we were able to get people like Sarah from Ireland, right? And so we were able to get people in attendance without having to have them fly to Omaha, Nebraska. And that was something that was really cool. We ran a virtual CTF, which was a huge success. We had nearly 200 users sign up for that. And we had, tons of challenges solved, and people had a really good time with the CTF. And then we had a virtual village where you could go in and learn about operational technology inside of a SCADA center. That was interesting. We basically had cameras on in this entire village area where they set up all their equipment, and they were able to walk people through kind of like the process of a skating machine. So all in all, it was a huge success. It was just an insane undertaking, but we ended up it ended up getting pulled off. So, and David and Sarah, I know you two were able to attend and view talks. How did you like it?
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. I think a couple things that I wanted to point out that you were pretty happy with too. No sponsors backed out, which I thought was awesome. The sponsorship, it'd be hard, right? Like we were a sponsor, but never once did we think about backing out. But there's a lot of money and time and people invested in sponsorship for these events, and that says a lot about the sponsors for KernelCon specifically. And the other thing too was one way that the interaction was kept alive was through Discord. So I think that's one other awesome aspect of what was put together here. Announcements, and they had different rooms for different things, and people had different tags for speakers and sponsors and village runners and organizers. It was just, in 2 weeks, it was run so smoothly. I'm really looking forward to the talks, which will be released in a few weeks, I think, to the public. So
that's a great point, David. That interaction, that con interaction that you get, we tried to carry that forward into Discord, and we tried to take the speaker badges, which we mailed out, and basically make them into tags and roles within the community. So speakers had their own role. They appeared differently to all the other users, which was kind of a cool thing for them. They're like kind of an Uber user. They had private rooms and stuff that they could also go to. That certainly made it more of a con atmosphere. We tried to engage users throughout the day too with contests, like whoever had the best picture of them in their home environment with their pet, or their best battle station. One of the things that I thought was I wasn't sure how it was going to work out, but it turned out to be awesome, was we pulled some of the more well-known hackers in the community and got little bumper videos for between talks. If a talk ran short or when we were on breaks, we would have some of the more well-known people in our community come in and give little short 15, 30-second videos, and just talk about kind of, their experiences and maybe about being safe, and just little bumper videos. So that was really cool. And it kind of contributed to the con atmosphere, which is, it's difficult to replicate.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, thanks everyone for stopping by today, and we'll definitely try and continue doing these weekly or so, and we'll talk to you later.